Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar, The Next Normal, Case Studies in Hybrid. We've just passed the 12 o'clock mark and we're ready for the next 60 minutes to take you through some case studies in hybrid work and what it means to really navigate the next normal. For those of you that joined a little bit early, thank you for joining us right now. And I hope you enjoyed some of that smooth and relaxing jazz that'll take us into the session. It was a careful choice of music. We were thinking a bit, we thought we could have been even a bit more upbeat, but we thought we'd set the tone for this relaxed discussion on possibly a very contentious topic in many businesses right now. For those of you that haven't met me yet, my name is Rob Jardine and I'm the Head of Research and Solutions at the Neuro Leadership Institute. I'm joined by some of my colleagues and clients today who have really been navigating COVID since it began and are just beginning to discover what their next normal can be like and have paid some school fees along the way. So we're very privileged to have them on the call today. But I do want to mention what the next hour is about. The next hour, we really want to be focused on audience participation as it is a panel discussion. And to do that, there has been some information shared in the chat around how to connect on today's conversation. And if it hasn't been shared, I'll just ask someone from my team to share into the chat function as well. And I'll also put it up on this slide. We are using Mentimeter, so we'd love for you to engage with each slide, and we will be asking targeted questions every few minutes or so to get your voices into the room in today's conversation. To join, please go to menti.com. You can use the code on the screen there, 76716204. And please, you are also able to interact with every slide as we participate as well. So someone from our team will also be putting that into the chat, but there are the instructions as well. For those of you that are perhaps new to NLI, I'll give a brief introduction before introducing our speakers and bringing them into the conversation. NLI is the Neuro Leadership Institute, and we really specialize in making organizations more human through science. We are a research-driven leadership institute, which means we take years of that white lab coat research and we translate it in what it means to solve organizational and people challenges in a 9 o'clock meeting. Being a research-based leadership institute, we publish our own original research that challenges conventional wisdom in areas that leaders care about the most. These include areas like diversity, equity, and inclusion, a growth mindset in developing change agility, performance management, redesign, and most recently, trying to solve what's top of mind for everyone right now. How do we solve the hybrid challenge? And I'm pleased to say in today's conversation, we're going to be talking to two people from two companies that have been focusing on their own challenges in hybrid, and we're going to focus on two big areas around growth mindset and inclusion. Now, I'm so privileged to have both Tracy and Mosa on the call here today, and I'm going to invite Tracy and Mosa to introduce themselves and also share where they're dialing in from. But before I bring their voices in, I do want to put this question up here to give the audience a time just to answer this question while we introduce our speakers. And the question really is, what are some of the themes you are seeing around hybrid work at your business? Now, it's a very broad question. We didn't make it a voting and multiple choice because hybrid, there is no silver bullet yet, and everyone is taking this challenge very differently. So we'd love to hear your responses either on Menti that's being shared here or in the chat as I bring in Tracy. Tracy, a warm welcome from me to you, not only distance over the internet, but also in distance this time as I'm dialing in from Dubai. Tracy, welcome. I'd love if you give a brief introduction of who you are and where you're dialing in from today.
Thanks, Robin. And a perfect choice of music for the discussion that we're going to have today. So hopefully by the end of the session, we would have shared, some of our experiences between Mosa and I, and hopefully it will be practical enough for everybody in the audience to consider in the organizations. I'm calling in from home today. And I'll talk a little bit more about, how we're approaching hybrid a little bit later. But today, my office is actually in my house. And thanks for having me today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. Mosa.
Hi, Rob, and a warm welcome. Good afternoon to everyone else who's on the call. I'm dialing in from one of our sister companies' offices. I'm dialing from the West Bank offices. I'm at the Fairland campus in the Greater North Cliff area. So this is what hybrid is looking like for us. Various options for us to choose from. It's a nice, sunny, warm day in Fairland today. So yes, that's what I meant. It's the background. I'm not sure if everyone can see it. I hope they can. It's just mirroring the journey that we promise you as part of being a West Bank client and as part of the bigger First Rand family. So that's where I'm dialing in this afternoon.
Wow, a great background, a great location. And I must say, between the three of us, we probably couldn't have asked for three better locations for a hybrid conversation. I, of course, am dialing in from Dubai. I'm here to attend the Dubai Expo 2020, where they talk about the future of the world. And funny enough, just out of my experience so far at the conference, I've had two takeaways. No one is predicting COVID to be around in the future. There's no mention of that. There's space travel, there's quantum computing, but no mention of COVID being a restriction. And on the topic of hybrid, what I was quite blown away by was entering a classroom yesterday where they projected the year 2030, not even that far away. And they said in the year 2030, not only will we have hybrid work, but hybrid education. So they talked about in high school level or primary school, classrooms being virtual with kids from Pakistan, Sweden, and South Africa in one class at the age of 14 years old. A scary thought to think about, a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of challenge in the current workplace to get something like that right, even when we're in the same country. So I think if we turn just to some of the themes that have come up here, I've seen a few themes already. Just out of interest, either Tracy or Mosa, are there any themes that stick out for you from what people have shared? I do see an interesting one about self-choice that we're going to get to in just a second. That's a big question around these hybrid policies. To what degree do you include autonomy or choice in that? Out of interest, Tracy, are there any comments that stand out for you from what's been shared?
Absolutely. If I just look at the words flashing up on the screen, the words that really I sort of, just caught my eye was trust, flexibility, uncertainty, culture, connecting, collaboration, which are all the things we're grappling with at the moment. I'm just looking at this lack of security as well. So really great choice of words, and maybe just to say that I can so identify, speaking from a different organization to Mosa, all of these words, we in the midst of this as well.
Yeah, I completely concur. I mean, the words that resonate with me exactly that connection, building trust, collaboration, culture, and also resistance, to going back to, whatever the office looked like before COVID, and how we navigate that. So that's definitely some of the themes that I'm picking up, which I find interesting, considering the topic that we're talking about, that, for the most part, I think initially there was a point where we thought it was all about infrastructure and technology, and the things that we needed that would drive, the kind of work that we're doing, whether fully remote or hybrid. But it's all these people, human-centric sort of themes that are coming out, which is quite interesting for me.
Definitely, and I think that was definitely a big part of the early, parts of COVID was, does everyone have internet access? Do we need to get them computers? And everyone's and we solved that a lot quicker than I think we could normally do. A lot of companies couldn't solve digital transformation for 10 years, but in 2 months, everyone had a computer at home real quick, right? But now the challenges are less about technology and more about the human. And just two things that stand out for me there is definitely well-being, and a resistance to go back to the office as well. There it is, resistance to return again. Hybrid, if done right, has the possibility to be the best thing to be done for well-being. Now you have the opportunity to spend more time with your kids, more time with your pets, your loved ones. So you have the opportunity to actually have better well-being, but it's also one of the burning issues in this space as well. So and also this is 2 years on since the pandemic as well. So it's always great to get a dipstick of where people's heads are at as well. Before I invite both Tracy and Mosa to share just a little bit around the nature of their businesses and how each business is approaching hybrid, I do want to ask one last voting question of the audience. And this question is quite important because it speaks to the role of autonomy in hybrid work. Now, autonomy is a difficult thing to attain in hybrid work, depending on the size of a business. But it'd be interesting to reflect on how much autonomy does your business provide in hybrid work? And these are things like choosing your office days, choosing your office hours, choosing where you work and when you work. I know it's a very general question, and there's many facets to autonomy. I think it'll be just interesting to see, because we talk about the resistance to going back to work, as Mosa referenced, is a lot of companies that have gone no autonomy have got huge backlash, with some people even resigning as a result when that autonomy was taken away. So I thought it'd be interesting just to see some of the results that come through there in a few seconds. Great, and I think as I allow the rest of I see we've got close to 80 people on the call today. As a reminder, if you are struggling to vote, please go to menti.com and use the code. It's all in the meeting chat, anonymous and confidential voting. We'd love to see some of your responses on the call here today as well. As the average comes through, I can definitely see that there is some autonomy, but not a lot of full and not a lot of no autonomy, which I think is also part of the challenge, because some businesses, depending on whether you're in a manufacturing environment, can't work hybrid. So there can't be autonomy given there. Some businesses have, 20,000 employees. You can't give everyone autonomy. How do you manage the practicality of who has a desk? So I think that is the biggest part of this hybrid challenge, is that everyone's operating from different points of view. But autonomy is a real interesting one, because autonomy creates one of the biggest social threats, that loss of control. That's actually why COVID hurt people so much, because those COVID lockdown restrictions removed autonomy for most of us for most of the period. Now, as I let some of these responses come through, Tracy, I'd love to just bring you into the conversation again, just to hear briefly. We know you are the Human Resources Executive at American Tower Corporation, but just briefly, what is American Tower Corporation, and how have you been handling hybrid at the moment?
Thanks, Rob. So maybe just by way of introduction, because whenever we talk about ATC South Africa being a business-to-business brand, there's just no context of what we do. So the South African business was established in 2011, and it was really through an acquisition of the Cell C Tower portfolio. The corporate organization was founded in 1995, and the best way probably for me to explain what we do is we're an independent tower operator, and we provide wireless and broadcast communications and real estate. And so to simplify that even further, some of those tower infrastructures that you see dotted across South Africa, and specifically in Gauteng, some of that infrastructure is actually owned by ATC. And the way our business model works is that clients, and in this instance specifically MNOs and MNOs or brands that we are all familiar with, place the technology onto our infrastructure. So that's just a little bit about what our business is and the game that we're in, which is very different to Mosa's. In terms of headcount, 130 employees, so very small in comparison to Mosa again, and possibly quite small in comparison to some of the individuals that have joined the call today. And if I think of hybrid specifically, I maybe just want to speak a little bit about, just our approach when we went into lockdown. And Rob, you spoke about it. There was a very big emphasis on, do you have the right tools to be effective? And so what do we need to do as an organization to make sure that you're effective? And there was a couple of themes that came through for us. If I reflect on, 2020, year one of operating in lockdown, it really was about how do we create an environment virtually where our employees feel like they belong, where they feel like, you know, the work that they do, there's a lot of meaning attached to it, that we can still maintain connections, and that what you're doing is actually purposeful. And that's a tall order in a virtual space. And so a lot of what we focused on as an organization was really focused around what are some of the habits that you can adopt when you're working in a virtual environment. And if we think about what our goals were like in the beginning of 2020, sort of March, April, May of 2020, I don't know about the two of you, but certainly for me, I just thought I was being invited to a lot of meetings. We know there was a lot of this Teams or Zoom fatigue, back-to-back meetings. People were struggling with trying to find this balance between, you know, some things that I need to do within my personal or home life versus my commitments from a work perspective. And so really, you know, tools that we focus on again was remote work skills. So what are some of those things that you need to do if you think about you know, managing yourself in your home environment? And by way of example, just to make this real for the audience, is if you think about startup and end rituals. So how do you start your day and how do you end your day? Because you're no longer getting into your car and driving to a location. So what are some of the things you should be thinking about or doing? If we think about communication, and often what would happen, and I'm sure this has happened to, you know, some of us on this call, that people were trying to see when you're available, when you're not available, what channel do you use when you want to talk to somebody? You know, is it a message? Is it a text message? Is it a message using Zoom or Teams? Is it an email? The other thing that we were grappling with is, you know, when we think about connection, is how do we celebrate the wins? So we're all apart, but how do we talk about the successes in our organization? So, you know, key insights for me, if I think about the first year, is really following an approach of giving our employees tools to make them more effective, giving our employees tools to make them more resilient. And I think you've spoken about, you know, just well-being and seeing how that's been amplified, you know, since we've been in the pandemic. And then from an approach perspective, you know, testing and learning. So as an organization, and for many of us on this call, there's no playbook. And even if there was a playbook, our cultures are different, our experiences are unique. So you've really got to find a way that works for your business and your culture. So our principle is really to test and learn. And then probably the third piece that very quickly I want to talk about is just these productivity hacks. So trying some things out. One of the things that we did quite early on in the pandemic is, because our employees were telling us we're overwhelmed, we just cannot find the balance. We actually implemented, under the test and learn bucket, we implemented meeting-free time zones. And to this day, we still have meeting-free time zones. So admittedly, it is only 2 hours a week. It's on a Tuesday and a Thursday. It's a standing thing across our organization. It's no meetings are scheduled, and it's really an opportunity for employees to use that time as they choose. And I'm sure the CEO won't mind me saying this on this call, but normally, you know, her meeting free time was to go and do a Pilates class. So we really wanted to give our employees some flexibility and really talk to this thing about finding some balance as we were trying to navigate some of the changes we're going through. So let's fast forward to 2022, because I think that's what we're all interested in. And if I think about, you know, just the lens that we used for making a better normal or creating a better normal, we really wanted to hang our hat on the neuroscience. And so a lot of what we were thinking about is, if we know that belonging is important, meaning is important, connection is important, whatever we choose to do about hybrid, we need to ensure that the decisions that we make always bring people sort of into this reward state. And I know, Rob, you'll probably share a little bit more about the science around, you know, just how our brains work in an organization. And we all social human beings, and we get triggered by certain things, and certain things are not good for us, because when our brains get hijacked, we don't show up as our best. And so if we want to create this enabling environment, and we're going to adopt a hybrid approach, you know, perhaps as an organization, where we landed was to say, we've got to really have some principles that we need to keep top of mind whenever we make decisions and whenever we're testing and learning. And so the four principles that we spoke about, and funny enough, it's some of the things that actually appeared up on screen as you asked the question about, you know, what are organizations grappling with at this point in time? And some of the words that we used was trust, flexibility, uncertainty, culture, connecting, etc. And so we said, well, we need to start from a position of trust. So for the past 2 years, we've had to trust our people as they've worked in their homes or from a location other than the office. So what is this burning need to get employees back into the office? What's the why? Why do we need people back in the office? So we need to be really clear about that. But it needs to be linked to trust. When we think about the office as well, pre-COVID, a lot of the way we measured success or whether our people were doing what they were supposed to be doing was really around presence, right? So it's about having bums in seats. So we haven't had people in seats. So why do we want to bring them into the office? And a lot of what we're starting to do, and I'll give you a few examples, but it really was about creating experiences. So when you come into the office, ideally what you should be doing is really not doing quiet work, because you should be doing that at home. You've been doing that anyway, right? Coming to sit in a physical location, sitting behind your desk, not interacting with anybody, and also understanding that we're not at a stage, certainly in our organization, that we're all back in the office. So we're always going to have some people working from home or another location other than the office. And so we've really got to create those experiences. And so to give you some examples of how we've created experiences, the CEO hosts, for the next 5 weeks, will be hosting breakfasts every Wednesday morning. And we're actually inviting different parts, employees from different parts of the organization. And it really is about conversation. So how are you coping? What could we do differently? These are some of the things that we're thinking of doing. And really the purpose of that is to co-create with our employees what hybrid needs to look like. I've heard about anchor days. We've debated, should we use an anchor day or not? And you know, I think whenever you make a decision, there's always some unintended consequence. And the debate that we often have is that if we make a decision, so let's say we need to tell our people that they need to be in the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week. I think the unintended consequence of that is, if you think of autonomy, and we've spoken about it, so, you know, you can't have complete autonomy, and you've got to create some guidelines. But what we've seen and what we've experienced is that we're really wanting teams across our organization to figure out a way of work that's going to work for that specific team. So our guideline is, come into the office, it needs to be purposeful. You need to have an experience, whether it's for brainstorming, whether it's trying to rebuild relationships based on some of the things we've lost because we've worked the way we have for the past 2 years. Those are some of the reasons that you need to come in. And then if I think about, you know, being quite intentional of not using the word policy. We've really deliberately not used the word policy. We've said principles. And again, it's the test and learn. Let's try out a couple of things. And if it doesn't work, then we need to change it, and we need to change it quite quickly. And so what are the key things, Rob? Because I could talk for this for so long. The key things are you've got to engage teams. And when I think about conversations that matter, and to share just a practical example, when we looked to reopen the office, we knew that we had to create an experience, and we knew that we had to take our entire organization through a change journey, because we'd all become accustomed to how we were working for the past 2 years. And I've spoken about creating that compelling why. So what we did is we actually reopened our offices on Valentine's Day, and we created a huge experience around, you know, come in, share the love. We want to see you in person. We haven't seen you for a very long time. So that was, you know, sort of the experience that we created, and it gave employees an opportunity just to come and see, what are some of the safety protocols that we had put in place? What was it going to be like? Because it was not going to be the same as it was pre-COVID. So that was just by way of example. Then to get employees comfortable with the idea of coming back into the office, because we know what happens in organizations is that, we will put out communications, whatever the channel might be. We could have conversations in our team meetings. But if we don't share enough information, people come up with their own stories, right? And the grapevine is very active, even though we're working in a virtual world. So we use, I want to call it think tanks. And so it's a facilitated session. We took the entire organization through a facilitated process with an external facilitator. And what we spoke about using, Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats process was to talk about, so how are you feeling about coming back to the office? So we need to give you the opportunity to share how you're feeling, but then we need to move you along and say, what are the things that we've not thought about? How can we be creative about some of the solutions that we're looking at? And not being too prescriptive as an organization and really listening deeply to what our employees were saying. And I think that's the key as we try to navigate hybrid, is that whilst we all have certain ideas about how hybrid should work, I think what's very important is to take your employees and your leadership teams along the journey, and that you really need to listen and listen to learn and not listen to respond. And, it's just some of the things that we've started to see, and we in the early stages of hybrid within ATC South Africa. Hybrid is the way we're going to work, and it means that we'll have some people in the office, some employees in the office, and some employees, in another location. It's going to be like that going forward. Do we have the magic formula? No, we don't. I think test and learn has given us the opportunity and permission to make mistakes as an organization and as a leadership team. And what it's allowed us to do is to test some things, and if it doesn't work, and I know I've repeated this, we've been able to course correct and change. And that message of saying that we actually don't know the answers is actually okay, because we all don't know, right? And so we've got to go through this process and see what works and what doesn't work for our individual organization. So maybe I'm going to pause and leave it at that, Rob, and I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to share a little bit more.
Oh, Tracy, so many nuggets there. I'm just going to encourage people to look out for the recording in this conversation, to go back just to pull out so many of them. I'll just share one story, because I've actually worked with your CEO and the senior leadership team. Is that ATC truly models the characteristics of authenticity and vulnerability in this space as well, which is so important, to really admit that we don't have all the answers. This is a big testing experience. It's a test and learn, not only for employees, but for managers and for leaders who are making these policies, as it were, right? So I think that's really been an authentic experience. And if I remember meeting your CEO in quite a serious conversation when I first met her, she was not afraid to stop the conversation to say, I need to take the dog out. The dog's scratching at my door here in my home office, and I need to do this. Really role modeling that authenticity and that psychological safety, that it's okay to take care of yourselves and take your meeting days to do Pilates. And that's where a lot of people are struggling with right now. It's not just having meeting-free days, but having the psychological safety to be vulnerable and take care of themselves as well. Mosa, I'd love to bring in your voice into the conversation as well, because ATC is only one case study with lots of success, lots of learning, but they're also a certain industry and a certain size. Not always possible for every business that's on this call to find relatable examples as well. And that's why we're so happy to have you join us here as well, Mosa. So we'd love to hear for those that haven't heard of F&B, just in broad brushstrokes, what F&B is, who they're about, and how you've been handling hybrid over the last 2 years.
Sure. I've been loving listening to Tracy. And yes, Tracy, I could listen to I love your nuggets of insights and wisdom that you've just been sharing with us. And I think, you know, as much as the organizations are quite different in terms of what ATC and you know, FNB do, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the experiences that Tracy has also shared. So, you know, FNB being a division of First Rand Bank Limited, you know, one of the largest financial institutions in South Africa. We provide banking, insurance, investment products and services to various clients in retail, commercial, corporate, and public sector customers and clients. And we do this through, you know, a variety of our portfolios and leading franchises. WesBank, where I'm dialing in from today, being one of them, and FNB obviously being also a big one in that. We in terms of our footprint, beyond the Republic of South Africa, we've got offices, people, work, connections, operations in the rest of Africa, several African markets. We've got FNB in Ghana, in Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, and other several international, you know, locations. And we're huge. So it's a big elephant, this one, that needs to be chewed, because it's over 45,000 employees across the brand. So at any given point, as you can imagine, there's a lot of change always happening. There's a lot of moving parts. And where we're finding ourselves in terms of hybrid work is the approach we've always taken is it's a conversation. You know, we always have to keep our ear to the ground. We cannot assume anything. We're not all made the same. First Rand as a business, part of our core strategy in terms of how we drive and enable the strategy is people have always been given the autonomy to be who they needed to be. So, you know, we've always said we've got all these variety of subcultures within the First Rand family, because it's part of our history and this entrepreneurial spirit that is always, you know, the forefathers sort of like philosophy. So there's been a lot that's been happening. If we think the 2.5 years that we found ourselves, even before that, we've, you know, always taken it case by case in terms of looking where we are as a business, what are we hearing, what are people looking for, and tying that to the bigger, you know, strategy, which is what anchors us. So in terms of what, you know, anything that's anchoring, that's what needs to give us direction. Our strategy has always been that, you know, shared prosperity for all and the role that we play as a business in greater society. So that has always been the core. And at the center, of course, is our customers. So anything that we deal with and we navigate, it's always having to come back and, you know, come back to the center and remind ourselves of that, and then try and see how it plays in different ways. So a couple of years ago, we launched what we call Productive Me, which is essentially a philosophy around flexible work. You know, it really just laid the groundwork of the foundation for the workplace of the future. So it was aligning technology, infrastructure, data, people, all in one, right? So the whole concept that people could work from a variety of locations. So that was, you know, a piece of, you know, work that FNB we implemented, and it was a journey that we started on. So by the time COVID hit, it sort of just accelerated that process that had already been, you know, that had already started for the business. So the whole concept that, you know, Rob can choose to work from a different location and a different campus, and what is the infrastructure and the processes and the, you know, that needs to support that, you know, what is the booking system that we need to put in place for Rob to be able to do that? How does access control work? You know, so there was a lot of systems alignment that had to happen to that, and that is still very much ongoing. So it's evolving as time goes on, and obviously with COVID, we've had to go back and relook at it, but we're very much fully in that. If I were to think now, coming in with at WesBank as an employee of First Rand, I've got full access. I can come here. The other day I was at our R&B offices in Sandton. I've got access there. So there's a process around how you book and how you access different campuses, which will help, because our philosophy around blended work now is that the office has a new purpose, right? It's no longer just the bricks and mortar around the physical structure. You know, it's about where connections are made, where solutions are found, where collaboration takes place, where we meet our customers' needs. All of that, wherever that happens, that's the new office. So our blended philosophy is also just being cognizant that because people are different, so we have had to provide some sort of guidelines around, even from a language perspective, Rob, if we think around, Tracy mentioned anchor days, for instance, so we want to be to avoid and be careful of things like 2 days a week or an equivalent, as an example. What we prefer is it has to be team-based. Those arrangements have to happen between a leader, his or her team, the operations, but most importantly, the customer. That always has to be at the center of any considerations that we make around where and how often or where we work from. Return to office as an example. So we prefer, focus on in-person connections. The offices have great facilities, but there's also an opportunity. The whole idea of being around people and collaborating is the ability to be storytelling and advocating and sharing with others. So dial up this whole notion that the facilities and the premises are going to augment the relationship building, right? So that was also one of the ways that we're trying to mitigate in some quarters the resistance. Pre-pandemic, so we'd like to continue the great work that we already started around flexible working with the productive me that I've mentioned before, and then what are the positive takeouts that we get from working virtually over the last 2 years, because there have been. Tracy mentioned them. In some teams, we've known there's been increased productivity, increased collaboration, increased connection. In cases, not so much. So where it has worked, we use those as case studies in terms of how we determine the way forward. Work from anywhere. So be careful of saying that. Be careful of, because that can be interpreted quite loosely if no clarity is provided. So it's more about flexible working arrangements, and flexible looks different for Rob's team, for Tracy's team, for Mosa's team, depending on who your customers are that you're serving, how big the size of your team is, the number of consideration and stakeholders that you have to engage with on a day-to-day basis. That's going to look different. So if I come, and say work from anywhere, that's not entirely true. And then, of course, with productive me, it's a philosophy that has started within one of the franchises, but we don't want to just keep it at that, because it can be too, narrow of a view. What we want to be talking is, let's use flexible ways of working, and let's see how the infrastructure, the technology, the spaces, the campuses are all in support of that. We don't want to be too prescriptive, but we want to say what is very clear is customer is at core. We need to always be servicing our customers, and then everything else fits around that. And it's always a conversation. So those are, sort of like the blended philosophy guidelines that we share with leaders, and then leaders, they need to take it forward. Rob needs to have a conversation with his team. Rob's team could be 5 people. Tracy's team could be 50 people. There's different dynamics at play here, so we cannot be prescriptive around, Tracy comes through 2 days a week. In some instances, we've had teams choose 1 day a month, and that day changes. It's not every Monday, it's not last working day of the month or the first. It changes because the team is in constant conversation around where are we right now? What is our workload looking like? How's Rob feeling? We know that last week his partner was not well, so there's those sort of considerations. So no, we cannot schedule anything this week. We need to give time for Rob to recover. So well-being is always at the core. And lastly, because we're always evolving and looking to see where the organization is. Last year, we introduced, around about September, we introduced a Yellow Wednesday. So on Wednesday, from about 1 o'clock onwards, no meetings to be booked. At that time, that was thinking time. So giving permission for people to be able to, freely block out time in their diaries to be able to think, because like Tracy alluded to, there was so much going on at the beginning of the pandemic. We literally felt like we were running all over the show with no sense of purpose and direction, and people lost out on the ability to just sit back, recenter, and think. So that's still a thing, more so in some businesses than other, because once again, different teams look different. So some teams have taken that on, blocked out their diaries, and we all respect that. When Yellow Wednesday takes place. We did a organization-wide wellness assessment last year, where we're looking at organizationally, where are we? So especially around the element of people being overworked, burnt out, stressed. What is the wellness of our people looking like? Because that is at core. A lot of people were really crumbling under different, personal circumstances. And that informs us, at least at the beginning of this year, in terms of the next steps that we need to take. And as we go along, we engage in leadership. The FNB CEO has been doing a couple of town hall sessions in person across various locations, going in and checking in, just checking with people who've been coming into the office. Because in some instances, workplaces and spaces are fully geared to hybrid work. Tracy could be at wherever, home or at a different site. Robert, as a specific location, can work, go ahead. And what are the dimensions that we need to take in place? Or in some instances, it's not working at all. So we need to hear both sides of the story. We need to hear where people are saying this hybrid for my team doesn't seem to be working, and these are the reasons why. So it's a constant, it's an evolution, like we said. It's not a revolution, it's an evolution, and it's constantly being in touch with what our employees are saying, listening and really listening to what is being said and not, and also what is not being said, to be able to determine the next steps. But so far, this is where we're at in terms of how we're managing blended working.
Wow, another great piece of just nugget-filled advice. I mean, when Tracy spoke and when Mosa spoke, there were so many comments in the chat. It was hard to keep up with the amounts of insights and nuggets that really came from both what was shared from two very different businesses that are trying to, solve the same challenge. And I think just one of the things, Mosa, that you said for me, they really stood out for me, in that it's not a revolution, it's an evolution. And at first, it was a forced revolution. It was almost not even a revolution. It was getting pushed out of the nest and hoping that we fly. And for the most part, we have flown. But now we're realizing all the compounding effects of a gap in leadership, a gap in well-being, a gap in how we approach technology. And that needs to be approached with a lot more care to evolve in the right stages. And I think that really speaks to also what another gentleman posted in the chat around. So what does that mean for leadership? I think the person actually mentioned, so talking about the next normal, what's the next normal of leadership or competency skills? Because I think that's really, top of mind. We've kind of gone through the pandemic and understand that for the most part, we're okay. But if we want to be future fit, if we want to be ready for the next normal, what does that really look like? And maybe what I just want to share briefly is just two pieces of research around that topic in general, because these are pieces of research that we've partnered with, not only actually with ATC and with FNB across the group as well, but are two topics that everyone is partnering with right now to navigate their next normal. The first, of course, is growth mindsets. And for those that are still dialed in, you can, on Mentimeter, you can give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the Mentimeter, or maybe in the chat, give us an indication if you've talked about growth mindsets at least once in the last 2 years. Let us know in the chat, give us a yes or a no if you've heard about growth mindset. It's definitely something we've partnered with in a lot of businesses in this space. But essentially, a growth mindset is really about understanding the mindset that influences how we approach change. And there's generally two ways we can approach change: in a fight or flight mode, or in a eustress mode, which is seeing change not as a challenge, but as an opportunity. Not getting bogged down in the brain's natural reaction to threats and cortisol and distress, but seeing change as a new opportunity or problem to solve for. And that framing of how you witness it is influenced by our mindset, which influences our beliefs, and at the end of the day, our behavior, how we show up, how we interpret, and how we interact with others. And that's largely been framed in the belief of a fixed or a growth mindset. Put simply, a growth mindset is our understanding of, do we believe our abilities can be grown and developed? If we believe our abilities can be grown and developed, then trying to figure out a new MS Teams functionality, which gets updated almost weekly at this point, is less stressful, but more of a new challenge to figure out. Whereas a fixed mindset is about proving ourselves at all times, which is a really interesting concept, especially when you believe that your ability is fixed. You want to not admit mistakes. You want to maybe not even attend to a crying child in a room next door because it might interrupt a meeting. And if your boss puts a meeting for you at 8 p.m. in the evening, of course you'll attend it, even though you're supposed to look after yourself or a loved one at that time. A growth mindset has the ability to feel psychologically safe, but also the ability to look at change and resilience in a different way, as an opportunity to grow, not an opportunity to get things right the first time. The second piece of work that we've really partnered with in a huge way around in African organizations in the last 2 years has been around inclusion and social threat. This really speaks to the understanding of the brain's natural wiring to keep us safe and how that threat network is unintentionally triggered in the hybrid environment. The few things you have to know about that is, number one, the brain has a central organizing principle to keep us alive. What that looks like is minimizing danger and maximizing reward. And based on whether our brain is scanning our environment for threats, we can see a threat or a reward. When someone doesn't acknowledge our virtual hand in a meeting, when someone takes away our autonomy and forces us to come into work, when an email goes out around a communication, but I wasn't at the office, so I didn't catch the water cooler talk about it, now I feel I'm out of loop. Or when some parts of the population have to come to work and I don't. At the Neuro Leadership Institute, we've developed a model called the SCARF model that speaks to the social domains that play out not only in hybrid, but in any situation where brain is involved. And just understanding some of these domains around status. Am I respected and valued in hybrid? Certainty. Am I in the loop? Can I predict what's going to happen to me? Autonomy. Am I given choices and control? And as we saw, autonomy is such a big driver that we can't take it completely out the picture, at least going back to our survey right at the beginning of this call. Relatedness, speaking to that hard to determine piece around how do we create belonging now, where all I see is head and shoulders of people over the last 2 years. And fairness, how do we display a fair exchange in credit and opportunities, especially when we might see a person once a week and we might see other people 5 times a week. So just better reflecting on some of these SCARF domains is really useful in trying to navigate what we call inclusion in a hybrid environment. Both in growth mindset and inclusion, we have separate training solutions that we've actually been partnering with businesses of groups of 20 to 20,000 at the moment for leaders that are trying to solve this challenge together. How can we be more resilient? How can we see around corners for what's next and be agile? And how can we be deliberate to develop empathy, authenticity, and trust to be intentionally inclusive in this hybrid environment? Put essentially at NLI, we actually say, if you're not being intentionally inclusive, you're probably accidentally excluding. And it's so easy to do that in this hybrid environment. So what I'd like to just end off now is just open up the floor once again, maybe Tracy, maybe just to share some of your experience, just in about 5 minutes around your experience with either growth mindset or inclusion in the space. You have talked a bit already to some of it. And then I'd like to bring in Mosa as well with some of your experience around some of the partnering around inclusion as well.
Sure, thanks, Rob. I was just thinking about when we had actually partnered with NLI, and I think we started the discussion in the back end of 2019, if I recall. And was it 2019? No, not back end of 2019, it was back end of 2020. And I shared a little bit earlier on just some of the things that we saw coming through as themes in terms of what we were focusing on. So creating those resources for our employees, focused around resilience. So how do we build resilience in a really, really tough time? What are some of those habits that you can adopt? And I think when we started the conversation with you and the two Robs from NLI, I think we were really sort of saying, as an organization, what is important for us? And you used the word a little bit earlier, and it just triggered a thought for me. You spoke about psychological safety, and when Anne joined the South African business as the CEO, which was in 2019, at the time she spoke about, we need to create an organization where we hear all the voices in the room. where people feel so comfortable to challenge, irrespective of the level that they are at in the organization, because who actually sees the problems in our organization? It's not the leaders in a business, it's often the people that are on the ground experiencing the challenges, the hurdles, the roadblocks, etc. And so we, based on what she was observing, we then said we need to do a couple of things to help our employees feel that it's okay. It's okay to challenge the thinking in the organization. It's okay to, share your ideas on how we can improve things, because that's really how we make things better. And that's such a great tie back to creating a better normal, or a new normal, or whatever you choose to call it in your organization. And if I think about growth mindset specifically, we rolled out this program to the entire organization in March of 2021. So the entire organization, it was a learning month in the organization. And if we think about, one of those habits of growth mindset, or there's 3 habits actually, it's always improve, inspire others, and embrace change. And I think it's so relevant if I look at where we are right now, that we wanted to get the organization onto the same page in terms of, when we talk about this, what does it actually mean? So in the world of ATC, we know there's science, but what does it mean for us? And so it is about creating that common understanding. And I think when we talk about hybrid, we talk about new normal, I think it's really important to define what it means in your organization and what it means for your culture, so that everybody can relate to it. Really, really key, to get that right. When I think back to just, as the decision we had to make as a leadership team, and through our conversations, if we think about having that fixed mindset, Rob, that you spoke about, versus a growth mindset, I think it would have been very easy to say we're going back to what life was like pre-COVID, right? So we're starting to normalize things. We want you to come back into the office. And so let's just go back to the way we worked before. I think it would have been very easy, but it would have been such a waste. Because there were so many key learnings that we all had in this period of the pandemic. If I think about the things that have been amplified through the process, and we've spoken about just this emphasis on well-being, are people well? So if you're wanting productivity in your environment, if you're wanting creativity, if you're wanting to drive innovation, those things don't happen when we operate from a threat state. You've got to be in a reward state. Rob spoke a little bit about what that means if one thinks about SCARF specifically. And so if I tie this back to, growth mindset, tied back to hybrid, really what it's meant for us is we're focusing on 2 things, and we're saying, how do we give our employees autonomy, and how do we create a little bit of certainty? So you can't just leave it up to people to decide. You've got to put in place some principles. And then you do need to provide some guidance. And I just want to quickly pick up on what Mosa had said, which is it's really up to managers and their teams to have these conversations and determine what works for them. But we must not assume because we've provided tools that it's going to happen. And so we're taking this a step further as an organization, and we're actually going into a series of think tanks really designed around working with managers and their teams and saying, so when we talk about trust, what does trust look like in this team? When we talk about coming into the office for experiences, be that one experience, Mosa, you spoke about, there was a team in your world that only comes in once a month. What is it in our organization, and what is it for different teams? So whilst we're giving guidance, I think there is quite a little bit of hand-holding that one needs to do in this process until our managers become comfortable to lead these types of conversations on their own. I really do think you need to as HR professionals, we need to work alongside our managers to really make this new normal, next normal, better normal work for us. Thanks, Rob.
I think you're on mute, Rob.
And I was just demonstrating how to make sure that you have psychological safety, to have your colleagues remind you that you're on mute there as well. And I think, thank you so much, Mosa, for that one. And I think it's a great quote to say it's not only about trying to figure out the next normal, but actually building a better normal with that evolution. And that's by co-creating it together.
Yeah.
Mosa, we'd love to hear your final words and perhaps a bit of the work around inclusion as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So, listening to Tracy detailing also some of the work that ATC has done with the NLI, I'm just thinking that a lot of what we've discussed today and what has been ongoing for many, organizations around, hybrid work, where we're finding ourselves, the effects of the pandemic and the new world of work and all those different themes, is at the core of it. What has become clear in our space as well is the element of inclusion. And that's why now, as part of the blended work philosophy, we zoning into that for a lot of the teams and a lot of our leadership. And leadership looking different, right? Because even an individual contributor is a leader of self. So as much as there's been a lot of our spaces, like our points of presence and our data centers that have always maintained physical presence, they couldn't, close or shut down. For the most part, a lot of the organization has had, obviously during the pandemic, during lockdown, we worked remotely. And now that, there's this sort of like reintegration taking place, you realize that at the core of what is making people to resist or to be excited about coming back to the office is the whole concept of inclusion. And, you don't feel included if there's no connection, but it cannot be connection if there isn't trust. Trust goes very well hand in hand with psychological safety. And these are all nice terms to, to throw around and give off to people. But at the core of what we also find is, how do you do that? How do you give leaders, when we're saying inclusion, what does that look like? And it's going to look different for every team, but it's about empowering a leader at an individual level to be able to say, okay, here are the basics, here's the foundation, then you go and have the conversations with your team. There's a variety of different, methodologies and tools and, that you can apply. But at the core, it's about being honest, and it's about these things, because leaders are also themselves people, they have a lot going for them. There's a lot that leaders have to juggle at any given point. So it's always sometimes feels like there's just so much that we throw at them in terms of, okay, yes, leader, here's another thing you need to do, you need to include, because, that's the reason why maybe there's a high turnover in your team, or that's the reason why the morale is down, that's the reason why this and this, but what we realize is at the core is the issue of inclusion, but how to. And that's why for us, the partnership with the NLI around the Include series was so important, because one, it was habit driven around, the neuroscience of smart teams and how our brains are wired for inclusion. And then it was interesting to see how when we started unpacking that with individuals and teams and, in the organization, what was coming out, the feedback that we were getting around, we have in some instances excluding, like you said, Rob, probably accidentally. But people need to be mindful of that. People need to be aware of that. People also need to realize that in your team, all your team members are individuals. There might be a team ethos that you adopt, that you have, but all of those people in your teams are individuals. And for a leader, that might be scary, especially when I have a complex and a disparate team that's spread across different geographical locations. And I'm thinking, how do I do that? How do I connect with each and every single one of them individually to make meaningful connections? But the thing is, it can be done. We've seen it. and that's why it has been so exciting to be able to partner with that. So it's ongoing, Rob. It's ongoing work, but we've started those sessions with the NLI. We're going to be continuing, because we realize it's an integral part of the work that we're doing. It ties in very, very nicely with all the other elements we've been speaking about: wellness and well-being, the health of our people. So all of those are different, components to a bigger strategy around blended work and, the success of or the new world of work, really. But how we prepare ourselves and how we prepare leaders, especially for that.
Sure. And I love what you've said there about all those buzzwords, right? Psychological safety, trust, authenticity. They're all cerebral. They're all quite, I don't say academic, but So what does that mean for me in the 9 o'clock meeting? What do I do on a Zoom call and then on a Teams call? And what's the difference? And I think that's really that fascinating challenge, which is so exciting to solve for in this hybrid environment as well. As a scientist myself, I love a good challenge, and especially something that is a giant experiment. And that's really what hybrid is becoming for a lot of people right now, figuring it out, but always having an evidence-based approach to the way to solve it. We have reached the last hour, the last minute, sorry, not the last hour, the top of the hour, should I rather say. But I feel like we could be going for a whole nother hour, to be honest. And from the engagement in chat, I'm sure everyone wants us to go for another hour, but I'm pretty sure we'll have you back quite soon for maybe a take 2, hopefully with no variant waves in between that as well. One reminder for those on the call, still on the call, please, we would love to hear your feedback for our own growth mindset. If you want someone from NLR to reach out to you, there's also a tick box that you can select on the feedback form, but please in the meeting chats, have a look for that feedback form to fill out. We'd love to hear what you thought about the session. What would you like to hear in the next session? Or if you'd like to continue chatting with us. We are at the top of the hour, but I think what would be great is just maybe to toss over for one quick parting shot, one from Tracy, one from Mosa. What's your parting shots out of today, or one word of advice for the future of hybrid, if we could sum it up into one sentence?
Yeah, quite difficult, but I think to leave the audience with something, I think conversations matter. Have the right conversations in your organizations.
Yeah, and to add to that, be intentional. Be intentional. For me, that would be my parting shot. If there's one thing that we've seen with everything going on, be intentional with everything that you do, with every interaction that you have.
And thank you both for an intentional conversation today.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Mosa.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks,
Thanks,
Tracy.
everyone.
Yes,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.